Hello, everyone. Welcome to our meeting this morning. Today, we're going to talk about the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program. So to get us started, we are going to go ahead and do some introductions between our team. So my name is Brittany Grother. I work at the Kansas Department of Agriculture in the Division of Agricultural Marketing, and I am a grants coordinator for our division. So any type of grants pertaining to agricultural markets, those usually fall under my purview in this division. So I will turn it over to Trace next to introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Trace Mulligan. I am the Agribusiness Development Manager here at the Kansas Department of Agriculture. My primary responsibilities is working with small and mid-sized farms, ranches, and agribusinesses for any growth or expansion plans that they might have. And then also within our agribusiness division, we do some recruiting to try to recruit some farms, ranches, and agribusinesses into the state of Kansas. And then also we do a lot of work with just kind of interagency navigation. If you ever have any questions about licensing guides or anything like that, we're a great place to start with and to help point you into the right direction. The Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program is something that we're extremely excited about and excited to start seeing some applications roll in, hopefully here shortly. And we're definitely excited to push this out to the state of Kansas, as we think it'll be a great thing for our food supply chain. And we're really excited to be here and to share this with you guys. So a little bit of background and a little bit of a program overview for the Resilient Food Systems program. And some of you might have questions as to why this came out. Primarily, the recent supply chain disruptions have revealed a lot of perils within our national food system that has really affected the middle of the supply chain. And with this, a lot of it, to be more resilient, was we need to be more diversified and distribute local produce, vegetables, etc. Within the state. So with this, KDA has been awarded about a $6.5 million cooperative agreement with the USDA to help build resilience into the middle of the food supply chain and strengthen the local and regional food systems by creating new revenue streams for our state's producers. So with this, KDA, we are working in partnership with the USDA to subaward these competitive infrastructure grants to Kansas food and farm businesses and other eligible entities. So the purpose is to make competitive grants for projects to expand capacity and infrastructure for the aggregation, processing, manufacturing, storing, transporting, wholesaling, or distribution of targeted local and regional agricultural products. So that there's kind of the middle of this food supply chain where things are fitting in that's specific for this RFSI program. This program is intended to support the local food system, crops and products meant specifically for human consumption. Some ideas of different products that it fits. It includes specialty crops, dairy, and different types of grains for human consumption. Ineligible products, unfortunately, anything with meat and poultry products, it would be ineligible for the RFSI program because there's other USDA grants out there that are specific to meat and poultry. Wild-caught seafood, animal feed and forage products, fiber, landscaping products, tobacco, and dietary supplements are all ineligible products. So if you have an entity that is specifically for that, those would be ineligible. Wild-caught seafood is ineligible, which I guess in the state of Kansas, not a big issue. That's more of a coastal thing. But seafood, I guess if you did have a seafood producing business that's not wild caught, it would fit into the RFSI program.
Thank you, Trace. Now I will talk about what we define as the middle of the food supply chain. So the USDA specifically defines the middle of the food supply chain as activities that take place after the production of an agricultural product, but before the product is sold to consumers. So these, as mentioned before, include processing, aggregation, and distribution of agricultural products between leaving the field and entering the marketplace. Sometimes field can be a little confusing with this program because um, some of our products aren't produced in a field that are eligible, such as dairy products. But think of it as after the product is produced. So, for example, if it is milk, like a dairy product such as milk. The cows, you couldn't use this funding to purchase dairy cows. You couldn't use it to purchase milking equipment, but you could use it towards the middle of the food supply chain, which would be things such as further processing that milk, pasteurization, those type bottling, those type of things. In terms of a field grown crop such as produce, the middle of the food supply chain would start after that product is harvested. So you can't use it for harvesting equipment or labor. But once that product is out of the field, you could use it for washing, storage, transportation, further processing, those type of things. So in general, these grant funds cannot be used for cultivation, harvest, or retail marketing of eligible food products. So at the end of the food supply chain, USDA sees that as the retail end, so being sold to consumers. So these funds cannot be used for retail spaces such as grocery stores, and also retail type setups such as shelving for a storefront, like an on-farm sales outlet type of thing. So that is what the USDA defines as middle of the food supply chain, and that is where all these funds will be targeted towards. Funding priorities. So KDA and the USDA encourage projects that benefit underserved farmers and ranchers, which would be farmers and ranchers whose total household income is at or below the national poverty level. New and beginning farmers and ranchers, so those who have not operated a farm or ranch for more than 10 consecutive years. Veteran producers, so producers who have served in the United States Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, or Coast Guard, or including the reserve components of those branches. Processors and other middle of the food supply businesses owned by socially disadvantaged individuals. So the USDA classifies socially disadvantaged individuals as people who are members of a socially disadvantaged group, whose members have been subject to racial or ethnic prejudice because of their identity as members of a group. So this can include American Indians or Alaskan Natives, Asians, Blacks or African Americans, Native Hawaiians, or other Pacific Islanders and Hispanics. For an entity, at least 50% of ownership in the business must be held by a socially disadvantaged individual for this to be in effect. And then also in terms of our applications, KDA will prioritize funding for projects pertaining to the following gaps that we identified in the middle of the food supply chain. So these gaps were identified during our outreach phase of this program. So back this summer in July and August, we specifically did outreach where we had webinars, we had a public comment forum, and we also communicated with many stakeholder organizations across the state to specifically identify the gaps in the middle of our supply chain in Kansas. And these were the top 3 priorities that came out of those discussions. So aggregation points, food processing infrastructure, and storage. In terms of aggregation points, Kansas really lacks aggregation points to help small and mid-sized farm and food businesses scale up production. It's often difficult for individuals, producers, to produce a quantity of product needed to meet the needs of larger buyers, such as distributors, hospitality. Oh, is everyone seeing the slides? If you could like give a thumbs up, I'll pop up my video so I could see that.
This is
Okay.
Scotty. I'm seeing it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We had a message that someone is seeing a blank screen. So I wanted to stop right there to get it fixed if we needed to. Perfect. Okay, we will keep going. Okay, so aggregation points. Because it's often difficult for individual producers to meet the needs of large buyers on their own, aggregation points are really important in the state. This is often seen as food hubs or farmer cooperatives, where individual producers can work together to fulfill those bigger orders while saving money on storage, packaging, and distribution by sharing those costs amongst themselves. So many producers in rural areas we see across the state are working with their neighbors and peers to aggregate products. It's extremely expensive to create your own cool or cold chain at this scale. So by creating new and expanding aggregation points across the state, we're hoping Kansas producers will be able to supply to larger buyers and keep more local food within our state. In turn, making a more resilient food supply chain within our region. So in terms of food processing infrastructure, Kansas really just lacks some of the food processing infrastructure for small and mid-sized food processors. So as these food processors are looking to expand their production capacities by adding product types, increasing volume, those type of things, they often need to upgrade equipment or even move to a larger space. Many food processors are working within their homes, and as they scale up their businesses, they need to move to a separate physical location. So existing commercial kitchens that are shared spaces across the state are also often fully booked with waiting lists, which makes them inaccessible to small and mid-sized producers, either due to geographic or scheduling constraints, as many people have other jobs other than their food processing business, but are looking to make that their full-time job. So capital investment is definitely needed in this part of our food supply chain to either create new commercial kitchens, upgrade equipment in commercial kitchens, help people create their own for their food processing business, those type of things. We also see food processing infrastructure as a need by institutions interested in purchasing local food for use in their meal programs, such as schools, hospitals, childcare facilities, and senior living facilities. So these institutions need this equipment at a large scale to help clean, chop, slice, cook, and preserve raw and fresh food sourced locally to extend its shelf life to be able to be used in their meal programs, especially schools when produce growing season is not always when school is in session. Okay, the last priority that we identified as within our top 3 is storage. So this is another barrier to growth in our local food system in Kansas. So once a product is harvested, producers need an ample area of storage to store their product for post-harvest handling and distribution. This can include cold storage, but also storage on the farm to segregate and supply identity preserved grains for human consumption for processing plants in Kansas. So funding projects to increase storage will help Kansas producers provide high quality fresh produce and products in general to growing markets and help reduce potential waste. So these are our funding priorities. That does not mean that's the only thing that we are going to fund. So just keep in mind, these are the projects we think would make the biggest impact in the state, but other project types are definitely encouraged to apply.
Thank you for that, Brittany. And thank you to everybody that is on here or anybody that might watch this at a later time for helping us out whenever we were doing outreach, whenever we initially signed into our cooperative agreement with the USDA to help determine some of those funding priorities of where the state should focus on that. So one thing that's really exciting and really neat about this program is that there's a ton of different eligible applicant types that could be eligible specifically for the RFSI program. So a few of those include agricultural producers or processors, nonprofit organizations, for-profit entities that meet eligible requirements of SBA small business size standards. So if you're a larger entity, make sure that you check that out to make sure that you do fall into SBA small business size standards. Local government entities, tribal governments, and then institutions such as schools, universities, or hospitals that will be bringing producers together to establish cooperative or shared infrastructure or invest in equipment that can benefit multiple producers. So hospitals, universities, etc., those are all eligible applicant types. One thing to note is that all applicant businesses and organizations must be domestically owned, and applicants' facilities must be physically located within the state of Kansas. We know with Kansas City, there could be some potential applications that might fall into both sides. So make sure the applicants doing business along the state's border, you should only apply within one state to avoid the possibility of duplication of federal funds. We will do a little bit of a review with Missouri, especially to make sure that we aren't having any duplicate funds being pushed out. So if you're in that area, make sure that you stay specifically to the state that you're, make sure that you stay specific to the state that your actual project and facility will be physically located in.
Great, so now we're going to get into the specific grants that we will be offering through this program. There are 2 types of grants. the infrastructure grants, and the simplified equipment only grants. So to start off, I will be talking about the infrastructure grants. The infrastructure grants will range in value from a minimum award of $100,000 and a maximum award of $3 million. So keep in mind that this award amount is what the federal funding contribution to your project will be. So infrastructure grant recipients are required to contribute 50% of the total proposed project cost as a match to federal funding. So for example, if you put in $100,000, the USDA would put in $100,000, and that is the minimum project value. So the minimum total proposed project cost for any grants within the infrastructure program should be $200,000 or above, unless you meet the reduced match requirement. So historically underserved farmers and ranchers or other businesses that qualify under the Small Business Administration categories of small, disadvantaged business, women-owned business, or veteran-owned small business qualify for a reduced match of 25% of the total proposed project cost. So matching funds can either be cash or in-kind contributions or a combination of both. The only restriction is that you cannot match federal funds with federal funds. So since this is an award from the USDA that the Department of Agriculture here in Kansas is helping administer, you can't match the funds with, say, a loan from the Farm Service Agency, because that is a federal loan. So there's no restrictions on how much is in kind versus how much is cash. If you want to do 100% in kind match, that is an option available to you. You can do 100% cash. These funds can be either your own private capital, they could be loans from banks, they can be investors, those type of things are all eligible as long as it's not a federal fund, because you cannot match federal funds with federal funds. We do have some questions about these funds, match specifically in the chat, so I'll go ahead and answer those now. We'll also have a question period at the end of today's meeting, but do the funds need to be available in full immediately? So the matching funds need to be in place by the time of the award. So the awards will be made no earlier than July 1st of 2024. But you will need to submit individual letters for each of your match contributions. We have a template on our website for how those need to be turned into us. And there's an attachment option on the application portal. So you'll need to attach a letter about each match, each individual match, to your application. So keep that in mind. If it is a loan, you will need to have a letter from the bank saying that they are going to contribute this amount of funds. And same thing with in-kind contributions. That can be people's time. It could be construction materials. It could be donations of equipment. Those type of things all fall under in-kind contributions, and those need to be demonstrated in a letter as well. So if you have an organization that's partnering with you who's going to contribute several hours of time to your project, then they would fill out a match verification letter detailing what their in-kind contribution would be. In terms of qualifying for the reduced match of 25%, is a self-certification process. So there's no documentation that you need to provide. It is a self-certification. Keep in mind that the ownership of your business, if you own it with, for example, a spouse or family, or maybe you're a cooperative, the majority of ownership, so 51% or greater, needs to fall into one of these categories for you to qualify for the reduced match of 25%. And then another question related to this: can expenses be incurred before the award? Expenses should not be incurred before the award of July 1st, 2024. That is because this is a reimbursement grant, so you will need to turn in your receipts, but you need to have paid for those, maybe supplies, equipment, construction materials, either July 1, 2024 or later to qualify for this. So even if you had ordered a piece of equipment prior to, as long as it's being paid for July 1 or later, then technically that is a gray area. That is okay. And just keep in mind, this is a competitive grant process and you're not guaranteed an award. So that is at your own risk if you purchase something before being awarded the funds to be paid after July 1st. Right, I am going to move to the next slide and we can answer some extra questions at the end. So infrastructure grant project types. So a project is a set of interrelated tasks with a cohesive, distinct, specific, and defined goal. It follows a planned, organized approach over a fixed period of time. So we are funding projects with these grants, specifically for the infrastructure grants that need to be completed within the grant's period of performance. So infrastructure grant recipients will be given 2.5 years to complete their projects. But your project needs to be completed by the end of that time frame. RFSI program grants will fund projects that expand capacity and infrastructure, again, for the aggregation, processing, manufacturing, storing, transporting, and wholesaling or distribution of targeted agricultural products. So on the screen right now, we have listed out the project types that the USDA has provided for this grant program. So I'm not going to read them all to you guys, but just some highlights: expanding processing capabilities and capacities, modernizing equipment or facilities, purchasing and installing specialized equipment, modernizing systems within your business, enhancing worker safety, construction of a new facility, increasing packaging and label capacities, increasing storage space, which also includes cold storage, installing climate smart equipment, or modernizing equipment or facilities to ensure food safety. So for some examples, some allowable activities or tasks that could be part of these types of projects could include hiring term limited personnel to assist with project implementation activities, purchasing special purpose equipment, analyzing your facility for upgrades or changes to meet regulatory requirements. So maybe, for example, you're a food processor and you want to put in some new product lines. That could be something that might have changes in terms of what you need to do for licensing. So that could fall under here. Working on your HACCP plans or other food safety or worker safety measures. And then also upgrades to your facilities or new facilities for processing specific products such as on-farm post-harvest processing, preservation or storage, post-harvest cleaning and grading, aggregator warehouse or storage, purchasing of freezing equipment, freezers or cold storage, processing, canning, preserving, and pasteurization, preparation and packaging, drying, hulling, shelling, and milling, and cooking, baking, juicing, distilling, and fermenting. Those are just some examples. All of those are listed in our request for applications document on our website if you would like to go back and reference those at any time.
A piece of the RFSI program that was kind of a later add-on from the USDA after some of the outreach that the different states were having was the simplified equipment only grants. And this is something that we're very excited about because there's probably a lot of projects, especially within the state of Kansas, that might not necessarily fall specifically into the infrastructure grant program, and they might just need some equipment. And so with that, we at KDA we will have two different types of applications, and I'll get a little more in the application process at a later time in this meeting. But we will be launching the infrastructure grants application and the simplified equipment only grant application at the same time. One thing to know is you can only apply for one of those, so don't be applying for both of them at the same time. So based on your guys' business and your entity and what your end goals are in mind, make sure that you kind of have that discussion and think about which specific grant you would like to apply for here. So for the simplified equipment only grants, those will range in value from a minimum award of $10,000 to a maximum award of $100,000. And the unique thing about this is that these specific equipment only grants do not require any cost sharing or matching. So this is a fixed price grant, meaning it will only fund equipment purchases. The amount awarded will be equal to the cost of the equipment, up to $100,000. So essentially, whatever the bid is or the type of documentation that you submit for the application, that is what you will get reimbursed for on the equipment only grant. One good thing about this is cost of delivery and installation can be covered for the grant as long as it's listed on the official bid. In terms of documentation for the equipment only grant, that can include contracts, catalog pricing, or any types of quotes provided by commercial entities that are out there. Whenever you're doing your equipment only applications, we would highly recommend that you try to get a bid that is like I guess kind of like a long-term bid that can hold up for a long period of time. That way the bid amount is what will be reimbursed to you. So if you apply for a bid now and they're not going to guarantee that bid come July, you might try to see with whoever you're purchasing the equipment from or whoever you are trying to get the bid for to get that pushed out. And it looks like we have a couple questions coming in for this. So one question is, can subsidiaries of the entity both apply for separate applications? Brittany, I don't know if you have anything specific to that.
I can jump in. So think of it kind of as how you would file taxes. If you would file your taxes for both of those entities separately, then that is okay. Keep in mind you have to have a unique entity ID from the USDA. So you would need to have two separate UEI numbers, one for each of those entities that you're going to apply. But also really make sure that you're not funding the same activities with both grants types because we have to avoid duplication of funds. And that is one of the reasons why you are only allowed to apply for one of the grants. Either the simplified equipment only or the infrastructure grants is because we really have to avoid duplication of federal funds. So it is up to you if you have two very separate businesses that are going to do completely different projects, then that's something you can consider doing the paperwork for.
And then there's another question on here about with the equipment only grants, how many quotes do you recommend? And do you have to get more than one quote? We would recommend trying to do a little bit of research and try to get a quote that is feasible. There's no limit necessarily, Brittany, unless you can correct me if I'm wrong. There's no limit to how many you have to get. It just has to be an official quote and an official bid. But like with everything, based on your entity, based on your business and what your needs are, we recommend you going and getting a quote for the piece of equipment that is best suited for your business.
Yeah, and you only have to upload the bid that you want to utilize on the application.
And then we have another question here that if we have a project that has potentially needs multiple pieces of equipment, can you apply for multiple pieces of equipment? And the answer to that is yes, as long as the total amount does not exceed $100,000. So if you have a couple different pieces of equipment that might total up to say $30,000, you can apply for multiple pieces of equipment as long as those pieces of equipment aid in the help for the middle of the food supply chain, which has been outlined earlier. And so that's one unique thing about this, and something we're excited about is that the equipment only grants can help get multiple pieces of equipment if it falls within the $100,000. And then another one, the simplified equipment grant have the same award date. Yes, the award date for the equipment only grant is the same as the infrastructure grant. Both of the grants will be running at the same time, and the awardees will be notified at the same time, and funds will begin getting dispersed at the same time. And then can you pay the balance over $100,000? I guess that's kind of up to you for what you want to do. I would say for the equipment, the pieces of equipment themselves need to be under $100,000. And that's what the simplified equipment only grants will be, I guess, being pushed out for. I would say if you have pieces of equipment and things that are over $100,000, those will more than likely start falling into the infrastructure grant program rather than the equipment only grant program. So for our application process, the application window, for those of you who have kind of been on top of things, is actually already open. So we opened up the application process November 20th, and the application for both applications will run through January 31st of 2024. So you have a little bit of time to still get things gathered and to put things together for the grants that are out there. And with this, we are using a grant management software this year called Submittable. And with that, all applicants, you must register for a free account on Submittable for you to go ahead and put in your application. So it's a very simple application process. Obviously, the infrastructure program one itself, the infrastructure grant, is going to be a little more of a complex application that might take a little bit more time than the equipment only one. So I'd highly encourage you to go ahead and get on top of that and make your submittable account and start doing some looking at the different applications to see if it's something that you'd like to pursue. Like Brittany kind of mentioned earlier, all applicants are required to have a unique entity ID, which is the UEI that you can obtain through sam.gov. That process takes a little bit of time. So we highly encourage you guys that if this is something that you would like to be a part of and to apply for, to please start applying for that now. The application for the UEI is not very challenging. It just takes a little bit of time. And so we would highly encourage you guys, if you have any thoughts or any ideas to apply for this program, to go ahead and get on top of getting that UEI as soon as possible.
All right, sorry, skipping too fast. And I will say it can take several weeks to get your unique entity ID. So please start the paperwork now if you plan to apply for these grants, because we really don't want that to hold up you being able to submit it on time.
So we have a couple questions about submittable, and then also if there will be grants that will be awarded, more likely to be awarded than others. So first off, can more than one person work on the application and submittable? The answer to that is yes. So the first person, I guess the main person that is running the grant will be the primary person, and then they can assign people to help them out with the grant and assign people to help out. The thing is, anybody that's assigned to help with the grant cannot be the ones that actually submits the grant application in the very beginning. So multiple people can work on it at one time if there's multiple people within the business that would like to go in, review things before applications are submitted. All you have to do is assign an additional person to the application. There is a question about, is there one grant that will be more likely to be awarded than the other? Within the state of Kansas, we did not put a limit or a percentage on if we will fund more infrastructure grants than equipment only grants and vice versa. So we're going to be looking at the applications the same way, and the people that are a part of our competitive review process will be looking at them and scoring them the same way. We want to make sure that funds are going to be distributed evenly throughout the state of Kansas, and that's one of our primaries, and to make sure that the underserved producers and the underserved businesses within our state of Kansas also get awarded it. And all of that can be found in the request for applications when it talks about the scoring a little bit. And I know that Brittany will go in a little more depth in terms of the competitive review process, so you guys have an idea of how that will work.
Right, so the competitive review process. So in general, these grants, both grant types, will be awarded through a competitive review process. So the following steps are how we are going to do our review. We're going to do an internal eligibility review, which will be done by Kansas Department of Agriculture staff. So we'll just go through, make sure that the applications were completed correctly, and that all of the expenses and amounts requested are eligible under this grant program. Then we will forward on grants for an external scoring review by an external review committee. So this committee will be using the rubrics that are found in the request for applications document, in which they will be evaluating the projects based off of the Distressed Communities Index score for the counties your project will impact, project need, project impact, outcomes, budget, feasibility, and external project support. Letters of support are not required, but are highly recommended to make your application competitive. So if you can demonstrate a need in your community, you could have community organizations submit letters of support. You could have stakeholder organizations write letters of support. You could also be the producers who will be impacted by your project. Um, if because it's ideally your project should be benefiting more than one producer, they can submit letters of support as well. So after the scoring is done, we will rank those applications based off of their average scores by the committee. And then we will forward an appropriate amount to our Secretary of Agriculture, who will have the final state approval. During that process, we'll make sure that the funds are being distributed equitably across the state and also across our different agriculture sectors. So not all the funds are going to go to the dairy industry, or not all the funds are going to go to produce growers. We're going to make sure it's spread across our sectors to the best of our abilities, in business types that are going to make the greatest need on our Kansas local food system. The final approval process goes before our USDA review board. So we will send all of the applications that we would like to fund with our budget amount from the USDA up to the USDA. Then those will be reviewed by an official USDA review board, who will make sure that all of the applications fit within the scope of the program. And at that point, that will be done in the summer. And we hope to hear from the USDA in mid-June, late June, so that the funds can be issued July 1st of 2024. That's when we will be making the award notifications and signing contracts with our awardees. That's kind of how the competitive review process will go. The application or the rubrics for both the infrastructure grants and the equipment only grants can be found in our request for applications document on our website. So you can see going in exactly how many points will be awarded for those different areas that I talked about for the external review committee. For the Distressed Communities Index, that's something that is kind of newer that the USDA is including in the application review process. That is going to be a map. So in the application portal, there's a link that you'll click on to a map, and you'll select your counties that your project will impact, whether it's just one county, multiple counties, a whole region, depending on what the scope of your project is, and it will give you scores for those counties based off of how distressed they are. And the USDA's intent is that we fund more projects in distressed areas of our state to help improve the economic viability of our state's communities. Yeah, I know that there were questions coming in. Let me make sure, see if there's any specifically about this review process, and then we will move into just general questions. So where do we find the points for each individual county? That's going to be on the Distressed Communities Index map. And the link to that is in the application. Will previous experience managing federal funds be a grading evaluation criteria? It is not. You do not have to have received a federal fund before to be competitive in this process. Are these grants taxable as income? I think that, so for the infrastructure grants, for example, you can have personnel and salary and wages and fringe benefits can be paid through those grants. So that would technically be paying people's income in terms of like buying the equipment and things like that. I'm not sure on the answer to that, Mark, but we can circle back on that one. Are the restrictions on types of applicants, types of producers, et cetera, the same for both grants? The
Yes.
applicant types are the exact same for both types of applicants, and are brand new entities encouraged to apply. We would ideally like to fund projects with an established need already, but that doesn't mean that business already has to be in place. So for example, if your community is established a need for a commercial kitchen and you don't have one yet, that does not mean that you won't be funded. So just keep in mind that you need to be able to demonstrate that there is a proven need for your project type in your community and to the producers in your area. If you've already been awarded federal funds through a different USDA grant, are you still eligible for this grant? Yes, you can have awarded USDA funds before to your business. You just need to make sure that you are not charging the same activities, equipment, supplies to both grants. You have to avoid duplication of federal funds. So you just need to have two completely different projects. If you've been funded for a different project before, it needs to be something different that you're applying for in this grant. Right, I'm going to move to the question slide and we'll go back through the chat and see what we didn't answer previously. And then also, if you have other questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and we can answer them as we go. Let's see. Is there a place to access the state plan so that we can better understand what the state has proposed and so far is reaching these populations, such as underserved farmers, new beginning producers, etc.? We do not have our state plan posted publicly. For the most part, our state plan and also the USDA program scope and requirements document for this program are summarized in our request for applications document. So if you haven't already read that one, I would suggest looking there first. If you have other specific questions after reading that one, please let us know.
There is a question that asks if these grants have to include more than one producer. They do not have to include more than one producer, but it is encouraged and based on our application scoring system. If multiple producers are benefited from this, then applications will likely rank higher based on that. So the goal is to have projects and fund projects that can help multiple different producers within the area.
Okay, there is a question on recommendations on calculating in-kind time, like a per hour rate. So if people are going to be contributing their time as an in-kind donation to your grant, I would suggest using their hourly rate. You just have to make sure it's a reasonable hourly rate. So someone can't charge well over their typical salary hourly rate for this type of thing. There is a specific government employee that they like tier that they cannot be higher than. So if you have any questions about that specific rate, please let us know. But just their reasonable per hour rate should work for the in-kind time contribution. All right, Trace, I'm just like going through the chat to make sure we answered all the previous questions.
Yep, I can go ahead and start answering some that are coming
Sure.
in. So there's another question about funds will not be available until July 1st. When will award notifications go out? Since USDA is going to have to do final approval on all of the applications, more than likely it's going to be pretty close to that July 1st whenever notifications will go out. If we have approval from the USDA that projects are going to be funded, we will go ahead and let those entities or those businesses know that they're going to be awarded for their project. But more than likely, it's going to be pretty close to that July 1st time frame whenever award notifications will go out.
Okay, we had a question about the USDA number that you have to apply for the grant. So one of our participants did put in the sam.gov website link for the registration. We are not involved at all in the creation of your unique entity ID number, your UEI. That's all through sam.gov. Unfortunately, we really can't help troubleshoot any questions you might have, but they do have a help desk on their website if you have specific questions while you're filling out that paperwork. Is this a needs-based grant or is any reasonable request that falls within the guidelines of the grant going to be approved? Project need is something that is evaluated on the rubric. So if you can demonstrate the need for your project, that will help you score higher. So keep in mind, we think that this should be a pretty competitive process. So try to make your application as competitive as possible by looking at that scoring rubric to see how they will be evaluated.
There's a question about somebody that is a veteran and their spouse is not, will they be able to apply as a veteran? So for all of the underserved producers, women-owned businesses, et cetera, veteran-owned businesses, you have to have majority of your business be owned by you to apply for the reduced match within the infrastructure grants.
We had a question that asked what a new structure would fall under which grant. So any type of new construction would fall under the infrastructure grants. The infrastructure grants are much larger and have a much larger scope. So you can pay for a lot more things under the infrastructure grants. You can pay for personnel time, fringe, travel, supplies, equipment, construction, contractors. Think about that. The infrastructure grants are bigger awards because they're for bigger projects. So they can encompass a lot. The equipment only is just for equipment. It's the only thing it will pay for.
We have a question here from a vegetable producer. So this could probably fit for a lot of different people that are on this, wondering how and what types of projects or equipment only projects they could potentially apply for being a producer. So one thing to think about as a producer is that these projects and the equipment need to fall into the middle of the supply chain. So anything for the cultivation, the harvesting, et cetera, of commodities or products will not fit into it. So think more along the lines of cold storage, think value-added types of equipment. So any types of further processing equipment, that would be what would fall more into this specific grant. And so while we know there is a need, obviously, for a lot of different helps and on the production side of things, unfortunately, this program here is strictly for the middle of the food supply chain.
Yeah, you could use this grant for equipment in terms of like a wash station. You could use it for packaging, like if you wanted to bag potatoes or onions or things like that for a wholesale buyer. You can use it for ways to extend the shelf life of your project, for like a freeze dryer. You can, yeah, all of those types of things could work for a vegetable producer. All right, I think I'm almost caught up to the new questions coming in. See. Okay, I might need some further clarification on this question. Since funds are reimbursement, is it permissible to use factoring company to pay for invoices? So let me kind of explain the reimbursement process, and maybe this will help answer your question. For reimbursement, after your award notification is made, you can start asking for reimbursement as many times as once a month, but at a minimum once a quarter. So if you want to ask for reimbursement every month for different receipts that you have, that is totally acceptable. We just want you to at least be sending us in invoices once a quarter to pay for that. And those will be filled out by you as the award recipient. We will have an invoice template. You'll be required to provide receipts for some of your expenses over a certain dollar value. Well, for equipment only, you have to provide all your receipts. For the infrastructure grants, you don't have to turn in receipts for like personnel time and fringe or travel. Keep in mind that for equipment only, you have to turn in every receipt. If that did not answer your question, please further clarify that one in the chat. Can we apply if we use a fiscal sponsor for accounting and administration? As long as your business is the one who is responsible for the duties of your business, you can apply. I would suggest if you're going to apply for an infrastructure grant, using that fiscal sponsor to provide a letter of support and just detailing out that maybe your business is financially supported by another organization. Post-award requirements for accounting and expenses. We kind of went over that just now with reimbursements. You'll be required to keep track of all of your receipts, and you will also be required to submit invoices for reimbursement to the Kansas Department of Agriculture. In general, for federal grants, you need to keep a hold of all of your records for 3 years after the close of the grant. So that would be, we are closing in 2027. So 3 years after 2027, you'll need to hold on to those records in case of an audit. There's always a risk of an audit at the federal level when you receive federal awards. So just keep in mind that good record keeping practices are important if you are awarded a federal award. So just keeping track of all your receipts and documentations for personnel time, those type of things have to be retained. Are you going to send out this? Oh, sorry, Trace. Are you going to send out the slides? Yes, we will post the recording of this meeting right on our website where you registered to attend today. So you can reference the recording at any time along with the slide deck.
There's a question about planting, harvesting, and cultivation being covered on the infrastructure grant program. That is not covered in the infrastructure grant program. So for both the equipment only grants and the infrastructure grants, those need to fall within the middle of the food supply chain. So the actual production and harvesting of products and commodities will not fall into that. Their question also kind of tied to that was for a trailer to take produce to market fit into this. If it is the transportation side of things for transporting products to market, that will fall into it as long as that's what the piece of equipment is being utilized for.
Yeah, vehicles are eligible expenses because transportation is a part of the middle of our food supply chain. So if you wanted like a cooled truck, those type of things can all be eligible under this grant program. Sarah has a question. As a hemp grain processor, you want to make sure hemp is one of the eligible grains you mentioned. So if it is being used for human consumption, but not as a dietary supplement, it would fall under this grant. So hemp is in a very gray area, as it cannot be considered a dietary supplement, which oftentimes it is. So if you have like a very specific example of what you're using it for, feel free to contact us. Both Trace and I's contact information is here on the screen, and we can do some more digging. If we need to forward it up to the USDA, we can ask them for help on that question. The factoring company pays the invoice in advance, and they are paid when we are reimbursed from grant funds. So we just have to, for reimbursement purposes, receive a copy of your paid receipt. So we cannot pay an outstanding invoice. We have to reimburse someone for the expenses. So as long as someone is paying for it, that is part of your grant, we can reimburse the receipt. Like that clarifies that one. Our infrastructure grant recipients reimbursed at 50% to account for the cost sharing. So you put in 50% of the funds for an infrastructure grant if you don't meet the criteria for a reduced match, and then the USDA award covers the other 50% of your project cost. So ideally, hopefully, you can use your match to start those initial investments, and then we can reimburse you as you go up to 50% of the total project cost. Did I explain that correctly, Trace?
Yeah, for the infrastructure grants, which are the larger grants that require the match, I guess kind of the easiest way to put it out there for everybody to understand is, say you have a $200,000 project, you will apply for essentially $100,000 grant. So you'll have to pay $100,000 of that yourself, and then your grant would cover the other $100,000 if you were awarded that.
I have another question asking for another company. Would a distribution company be eligible to purchase a refrigerated truck to distribute locally made products, or do they have to produce the product? The company, to my understanding, as long as they can fit within the Small Business Administration guidelines as a small business and they are benefiting local producers with their project, I think that they would be eligible to apply and purchase a refrigerated truck. We have about 4 minutes left. Do we have any other questions that we can answer online? Again, Trace and I's contact information is on the screen right now, where it is also listed on our website and in our request for applications document. If you have questions that you want answered offline, give us a call, send us an email. We both are perfectly capable of answering your questions. And if we don't know the answer, we'll talk to the other person, and we can also talk to our USDA grant specialist. Keep that in mind. I would encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to please review the entire request for applications document. I know it's easy to skim, but that will just make it so that your application fits the criteria, and that you have a competitive application to be funded.
If you ever have,
Go ahead, Trace.
I was just going to say, if you ever have any specific questions about if a certain project or anything like that will fit into the middle of the food supply chain, I know that's probably one of the biggest questions of, will this piece of equipment actually work? Feel free to ask Brittany and I before you go through and you start filling out your applications. We'd love to help anybody out that's out there to help determine if it would be a viable application. That way you don't spend too much time going and applying for something that is not in the middle of the food supply chain, because that'll be one of the first things that Brittany and I review, is to make sure that all the applications are actually eligible and fit within that.
We had a follow-up question about the taxable income question. We don't know the answer to that question, but we're going to look into it. And we can add it to our website as a frequently asked question once we get the answer to it. We just don't know that ourselves. We currently don't work. This is our only grant that requires matching funds. So we haven't ever done matching funds before. So this is kind of new to us as well. So we're learning as we go. I also want to point out that we will have another webinar that's kind of structured like office hours on December 19th from 2 to 4 p.m. It's going to be on Zoom, just like this one. We are going to walk through the applications and talk about what type of information should be put in which sections. And then we'll also just leave it open for people to pop on when they have time between the 2 hours and just ask questions about the application. If you have questions, of course, you're always welcome to ask us those questions at any time. But we just have that scheduled office hour session if anyone wants to pop on at that time. But we will be walking through the applications on that meeting. Great. 1 minute left. Does anyone have any last minute lingering questions? All right. Can you post the link to the application here? Yes, we can throw that in the chat. Oops. Bring up my whole page. And Submittable was something that we contracted with because we feel like it will make it easier for everyone to fill out. And Submittable is really fairly easy to use, which is nice. So the applications can be found here. It takes like 30 seconds to make an account. All you have to do is make a username and password. And like Trey said, you can add collaborators, in which it just generates an email that sends someone a link and they can click it and they can help you with your application as well. Alrighty. Well, we're so excited that you are all interested in this program. We can't wait to see what it does for our local food system in Kansas. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to Trace or I. Okay. Thank you, everyone.